it's got to be the first panel today. So we're gonna kick it off with a great one. I have a couple intros to run through. If you were at a panel yesterday, you heard all this already. So thank you for joining us at the 11th Annual Denver Startup Week. Thanks to our title sponsors, Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Dell for Startups, and the Downtown Denver Partnership. This session is part of the People track, sponsored by the Commons of Champa, one of 8 programming tracks aimed at supporting the entire entrepreneurial team. By attending this session today, you agree to follow our code of conduct as well as to being photographed and recorded on video. Be sure to share your experience at this session online using hashtag DenStartupWeek. You can also do hashtag MyInsurance, Rep and Pie, that's where we work. Yeah, shameless plug, absolutely. So we're going to kick this off, do some intros from the panelists, and then dive into the meat of the conversation. We do want this to be conversational, so what we will do is start off with a question, have the panelists go through, have a discussion. We want to have, save some time for Q&A at the end of each question rather than go through the whole panel, wait till the end. So if you have questions, feel free to jump in, jot them down. We'll have about probably 10 to 15 minutes or so for each question. But again, want it to be conversational. So we'll kick it off with some intros. If you can share your name, pronouns, role, and company, and then previous learning and organizational development experience. I'll start. I'm Dan Snyder. I'm our head of talent at Pie Insurance. He, him pronouns. Don't have much learning and organizational development experience personally. Grew up in the world of recruiting, but super excited to be moderating.
Hi, I'm Jen Strauss. I'm VP of People Operations at Pie Insurance. She, her, hers are my pronouns. And background in L&D, I was actually in academia and made my way into the people space through L&D at Cabbage, a fintech company years ago, and then have continued to work in the L&D space throughout my career.
Okay. Thanks, Jen. Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Harper.
A lot of seats up here, people. We don't bite.
Come closer.
Can everyone hear me now? Yeah, maybe. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Betsy Harper, and my pronouns are she and her. And currently, I am on our learning and organizational development team at Alteryx. And I would say I am the epitome of your jungle gym career path into learning and development. So I come from higher education. I've always worked with adult learners, just in different capacities. And my job at Alteryx was kind of the end of my pivot into L&D.
Hi, I'm Hillary Davis. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the founder of Altogether Human. We are a human-centered learning and development consulting and coaching firm. So we work with folks to build corporate boot camps and retreats, manager learning, everything from a 2-hour virtual class to a 3-day retreat on Manhattan Beach for executives. And I started my career in leadership and learning development when I joined a coaching and training firm. Did that, traveled all over the world for about 7 years, and then launched my own company 5 years ago. Have a major passion for learning and development and helping people be the best they can be.
Awesome. Sign me up for the Manhattan Beach one. Philip Botha, he, him. I'm a people partner at Pie Insurance. So I'm told I have a bit of an unconventional background. I actually started as a software engineer, building software, and then became a manager. So I did that for 12 years and built some successful teams. And then I realized you need more than just a good leader to be successful. And there's a whole environment, a whole ecosystem required for that. So I'm told I went over to the dark side. I see it the other way around. And join kind of the people side of things. And now I'm basically an internal consultant for leaders in terms of how to build your teams, advising executives on, when, what program, and who to choose for that. So looking forward to spending on learning from this. A lot of experience here.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. So again, up-leveling your leaders to prepare for the future. So we're going to be talking about scaling an organization, how we approach really helping our leadership team grow in their roles. We're going to start off with the first question, which is, in hypergrowth companies, it's common for the leadership needs to change as the organization grows. So can you speak to what the needs were for leadership when your organization was small, small meaning less than 100 team members, and how those needs have changed as the organization grew? And anyone prefer to start us off?
I can jump in.
Awesome.
I think one of the myths is that there is a time and place for people development or for manager development and enablement, and that there's some sort of number or tipping point. In my experience, and one of the things that we really advise our clients on early, is that manager enablement matters all the time. Your managers are your front lines, driving retention and engagement and results, and there's never not a good time to invest in managers and help them feel the love and feel supported and feel invested in. What that looks like at different numbers, of course, is going to change. What you offer to an employee or a company of 10,000 is really different than what you're going to offer at 100 people. But it might look like stipends, it might look like upskilling folks, sending them external to your company, taking classes, even if it's just weekly mentorship meetings with executives and that next level down. And then, of course, when you have thousands of people, you want to look at internal development, internal classes, content, like building out something really big and scalable. But there's never not time to think about your managers.
I think just like to add on to what Hillary said, I think that was some excellent points. In my time at Alteryx, I kind of came in when we were just a little bit over 1,000. And the things that I was seeing with our leaders is that they were kind of still in the weeds. There was not a lot of, they were still feeling kind of the bumps of the organization as it was growing and as it was still doing business. And now, about 3 years later, we have actually more than doubled in size. And so, just like Hillary said, the needs of our people have changed. And now we've brought in a strong base of frontline and middle managers to kind of feel those bumps and to support them in that way, while our senior and more tenure leaders are kind of looking at more strategic leadership. And what we're doing now actually at Alteryx to make sure that we're addressing this is that we're kind of taking a pause on all of our leadership development programs and doing a really intense, deep, in-depth leadership assessment. And we're taking an appreciative inquiry approach and really speaking to all of our leaders and asking them to define what success looks like, what skill sets make a good leader, what is critical for our leadership base at this time. And then having them have kind of declare our destination, the learning and organization team is going to be the ones who are going to make that path going forward and make the journey for them. And so we are then going to take their answers and build out our strategies, whether it's internal development, external programs, or even just individual coaching. And something that I've kind of learned along the way at Alteryx is that when we have looked at particular stages of our leaders, like an emerging leaders program or leadership at the peak, it kind of builds a disconnect between your leaders. So we really want to make a comprehensive and cohesive learning strategy from the very beginning at the IC level to those, Jen has shared this, the curious and the certain about leadership all the way through. So everyone's kind of speaking the same language.
Awesome. Well, you sort of answered my follow-up question, which was, what did you do from a learning and development perspective to help these leaders meet new expectations and needs as a company has scaled? So I don't know if anyone else wants to answer that question. Betsy just gave a pretty thorough answer from Alteryx.
I'll just tag on to what she's saying too. So I think a lot of when you look at startups and the evolution of the companies themselves, there are certain inflection points with, that first group of people that comes in, and you're kind of just looking for those people that are super scrappy and are going to do literally whatever needs to be done. And that's such a specific skill set that is so valuable when you're smaller. Between I would say 200 and 500 is when you start to reach this inflection point of where it's like, I appreciate that, But we also really need people that really know this space and can start to up-level our organization. And that, I think, is a really pivotal moment for leadership and the ways that we're investing in our leaders to make sure that those really scrappy people that did so much for the organization early on are able to continue to contribute in the ways that we need them to as we move through that inflection point. And so some of it's just awareness of the fact that we're in this inflection point and that things are changing. And to Betsy's point, that when you're in this inflection point, a lot of it is getting them out of the weeds. How do you get them out of the weeds? Well, sometimes it's building the team so that they can start to manage and lead instead of doing the work. Sometimes, too, you realize they don't want to be out of the weeds, right? Like, I've worked with leaders that are like, actually, like, I've enjoyed this in this stage, but when I look, if you tell me that if I stay in this leadership role, I'm not going to be able to do X, Y, and Z, that doesn't fill my cup. And so it's really having those honest conversations. We at Pi have moved people from leadership positions back into IC roles because that's where they really shine. And so I think it's just being really attentive to what your leaders are doing and when, and whether or not they're really flourishing in that position in the stage that you're at.
Before we move on, open up to any questions from the audience. Sure.
Yes, sorry, 200 to 500 employees. And that's totally anecdotal. So I have zero research behind that, but that has been my experience.
Awesome. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question just for the sake of the video. So she asked, how do you have those conversations with people that maybe aren't flourishing as leaders, and how do you move them back into IC roles? Honestly, I think partly it's just being completely honest and also making sure that they agree. Most of the time when you go to have these conversations, it's almost like a deep sigh of relief that A, we see you, and B, we don't think this is bad. It's not a punitive conversation. It's not you're failing as a leader and your options are to get on board or get out. But hey, we recognize the way that you've contributed to the company up to this point. Either we need to figure out how to get you really successful as a leader, and you need to decide if you're committed to that. And if not, then do you want to go back to an IC role? Philip might be able to talk about this better. I'll pass it over to him because he literally just did this like 2 weeks ago.
I mean, and what Jen spoke about is kind of creating that psychological safety, right? Of this is not failure. You know, expectations of a leader versus an IC are different. My view is I kind of push them as different career tracks. It's not like, oh, you promoted up to a leader necessarily. Yes, there are requirements, but it really, you're going to index on a different skill set. And people need to understand that. And as we kind of build out what leadership looks like, it becomes more clear. So it's kind of an education process, not just for the leader or leadership, but also team members. Like, don't put leaders on a pedestal. It's like as if they know everything. Well, we don't, right? Hopefully we don't think, we don't think that. But I'm relying on them for a different skill set. And for that, you need passion, motivation. So the conversation I had more recently was really just kind of coming alongside the individual, like what drives you, what gets you excited, what gets you out of bed in the morning, and helping them get clarity on that. And the great thing was they arrived at the answer themselves. Like, we didn't have to tell that. We just kind of created the psychological safety and the kind of support framework in terms of like, almost like, I want to say like coaching / mentorship. And then they said, I want this. And then it became really, really easy. Then it's just kind of around helping them transition and having a conversation with teams, starting with the immediate team, co-leaders. When another leader sees another leader moving to an IC level, they'd be like, oh, why is that? What did they do wrong? What am I doing wrong? So there's a lot of questions. And so a part of that, building out that psychological safety, there's several conversations that you need to have. And that just helps you build relationships and kind of lubricates that move. And I'll say, of course, there's a lot of, the conversation goes further because other organizations look in as well, and they're like, well, what happened over there? What can we learn from this? So it's good to kind of put that on a, what's a good way of putting it, kind of shining a light on it. What happened here? What was the journey? And so everyone can learn from that. And I reckon, I'm hoping, following conversation will be a lot easier, quicker, like, oh, okay, this person probably wanted that. That's a good thing.
Just to add, there's another example of somebody that he's been with the company for I think 4 years, and we're only 5 years old. He has been a significant contributor to our success, and early on it was like, hey, like, can you lead a team because we need you to? And he, from the beginning, said, I don't want to do this, but I will. And throughout the last year since I've been here, we've had that conversation with him. We know that we asked you to do something that you didn't really want to do, and you still did it, and we appreciate that. And we gave him the space to say, do you want to go back to an IC or do you want to stay here? And he took some time to really reflect on it, and he actually landed on, actually, I didn't want to go here, but now I do. And I'm learning a lot here, and I like this path. So these are really long ways of saying, just talking to the people about it and being honest and not having it come from any type of punitive place, I think is the most important.
Awesome. Addie. Individual contributor. Thanks. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. We're about 450 people. The question was, how many people does Pi Insurance have today? A little history. I joined in January of last year. We were just over 200. Now at 450. We'll likely end the year around 485. But we actually grew pretty significantly throughout the pandemic, so a bit unique.
You mentioned the tipping point where you need people who are skilled at something specific to move the company forward. So I guess my question is, what are you seeing in the market today that help you to provide that skill when you're not before the tipping point? I think you didn't say tipping point. You used a different
Inflection point.
Inflection point. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's a really, so her question was, I had mentioned these inflection points. What are we seeing in the market? How do we meet that need?
Like as a benefit or a people development tool in the
Yeah.
market.
So it's really interesting. I'll give a specific example. When I was at Cabbage, we had our approach to hiring engineers when we were small was to hire full stack engineers that could literally do anything. As we grew, we were like, oh, we need front-end engineers, we need mobile engineers, we need these specifics. So we started, and I would say at that point, we probably had maybe about 20 engineers that were those legacy engineers that we were like, we have to sit down and talk to them and ask them, first off, lay out for them, this is the direction we're going, and then ask them, where do you want to go with us? Do you want to go with us? Because some of them left to go to a startup that was smaller. That was they were employee 20, and they went back to be employee 20 because that's where they thrive. And they were like, thank you for, the opportunity. This isn't the direction I personally want to go. We had another engineer who really wanted to stay. And I swear to God, everybody was crying when we let him go because we tried him in 4 different roles and it just didn't work. He wasn't learning the skill, and he, at the end of the day, went back and he started doing more full stack stuff. So I think sometimes it's being able to have those discussions and saying, okay, which way do you want to go? We also did this with our QAs at Cabbage. We moved from manual QAs to automated QAs. So we put them through all of the training so that we didn't have to replace any of our QA engineers, but we gave them the skills to be able to do QA the way that we wanted to do it as we moved forward. So I think a big part of it is understanding where you're going, understanding those people that have gaps, and asking them, how do you want to work with us to fill those gaps? And again, that precursor, do you want to?
Thanks. Well, I'm going to move on to the next question so we can get through a few questions here. And selfishly, I really like this question. So it has to do with talent and hiring externally versus working with internal leadership and upskilling. So the question is, when thinking about upskilling your leadership team, at what point do you make the decision to hire external talent that has the competencies, the skills that you're looking for, versus working with your internal leadership team, developing them to get to those skills and competencies, and what specific drivers may impact that decision?
Well, there are a couple different drivers that I look at, and it's so subjective, right? Because there are so many situations, there are so many different drivers. But I always look at a couple things. One is, what are other people on our team today currently capable of that we are not leveraging? We tend to think that people are just their job description. So like, well, that's a QA person, they're really good at that. That's a full stack developer, they must like doing that. But the reality is that there's untapped potential and untapped capability inside every single person. So I always want to look at what are we not utilizing that's here today and start by having those transparent conversations. This is what we need. Is this something you want? Is this something you're capable of? The flip side is, what do we desperately need that we do not have on our team? If you're trying to scale your CS org and no one on your team has ever worked in a CS org beyond 5 people, or they've never worked with enterprise clients, that's a thing you need that you need to go out and get. So the third driver for me is just time. How quickly can I either get this person up to speed? How quickly do we need this thing? So we need to go out and hire that external expert. And then I go back to tenacity, drive, all those questions that Philip had. Is this something that you are capable of? Is this something that you want? Do you want to get promoted from where you are? Do you have kind of that broad, scrappy expertise, or are you a deeper expert? But it does come back to those conversations and how much time you have and what the situation is that you're dealing with.
So I think that this is one of my favorite questions too. I love it because I think it is about being honest with yourself about your leadership team. So when I think about leaders, I think it's really easy to think about leaders individually and be like, we have this leader here and this leader here and this leader here. When I think about the organization, I think it's actually more beneficial to think about the leadership team and understanding how does this group of leaders come together to drive the results that we're trying to get for the business and the organization. And in that way, I'm very visual. I literally think about it like a football team. And I'm like, so many different skills need to be present, right? Obviously, there are some similar kind of competencies like tenacity, drive. You want to see those things, but everybody's bringing something to the table. One of the questions I always ask leaders when I'm interviewing is, what type of leaders do you complement? And it's kind of a workaround asking what are your strengths, but it also shows self-awareness around like, I'm not going to be mad when the leaders that I work with or for don't show this thing because I excel there and that's what I bring to the table. So thinking about leadership in a way where it's, how do I build this team so that as an engineering organization or a people and talent organization or a marketing organization, we get there. We get to where we're trying to go. So that's one of the big things that I think about. And so it's like, do we have the internal talent that can do that? Do we have those complementary things internally that we feel like can get us there? The other thing that I think is really important, this is kind of 2 parts, but it's understanding where your current leaders are. Because if you bring in leaders under them and they're not yet mature enough as a leader to mentor them, you're setting yourselves up for a lot of work, right? And potentially negative team member experiences that then you're going to have to deal with down the line. So part of it's understanding where are they, and let's say you have a really skilled leader, and let's say they're a senior manager or a director, and they're like, I really want to promote this person on my team. One of my biggest questions is, do you have the time for them? Because it's really important that you bring in people and that you build a team that you believe can be successful and that you yourself are committed to. So it's always like, I had this conversation with somebody last week, our VP of Finance, and she was interviewing someone for a senior manager. And I said, this person is very technical. This is like classic, they're good at their job, let's promote them, right? he just did not yet have the raw skills for leadership. I was like, this is a senior manager role. He's maybe at the team lead level. So you as a vice president, if you want to hire this person, totally your choice, but know what you're getting into. And if you know what you're getting into and you're willing to do the work to mentor and lead your own leaders, fine. And that's both internal and external. So it's really understanding, like, I think that complementary framework is really helpful for understanding what do I have and what do I need, and therefore where do I look for that.
So yeah, I want to add on a small thing there. Kind of probably what you've heard is there's a bit of a thread of starting with the individual. Do they have what it takes to kind of, invest in them and grow them to where we need them to be? I think the reality is here, there isn't, these perfect human beings walking around the street, and we just need to find a few of them and put them in the seat and we're good to go. It's not really, none of us are perfect, we're all on the journey here, right? The one thing I have kind of observed in kind of my journey to the dark side, and I'm studying IO psychology at the moment, and kind of on the transformational leadership bandwagon, one of the kind of antecedents, one of the ingredients that they look for in people who actually do grow into, great leaders, is that intrinsic motivation of the why, right? Why do I want to be a leader? And kind of a common thread is that there's a caring there for people, like a sincere caring, that there's no one why that's perfect that you need to, put on a label, but it's caring for people definitely needs to be part of it. So that needs to be part of the why. And if you can find that kind of innate drive, and they're also, like Hillary said, growth-minded, you're pretty good. Like, that's the kind of person you can invest in, and they'll fly because they'll have the drive, they have the motivation, they have the openness to learn and take feedback. So in terms of promotion, those kind of scrappy people who got you where you are now, that, like Jen said, it's a challenging decision point. Well, do I keep investing? Are they the right person to get me to where I need to go? So that's probably something to keep in mind. And I think I'll add on, just kind of looking holistically at your team, is it diverse enough? What else do we need? And also remembering your leadership is also a team. Like, in a lot of ways, it's your first team. So kind of making sure they play well together, they're diverse enough, we have enough of background there to be awesome.
Great. Thanks, everyone. If no one else has anything to add, I'll open it up for questions. That wasn't meant to be. No, I wasn't looking directly at you. Do we have any questions? Sure.
Yeah, so perfect world when you're thinking about building out your leaders, you know what the organization is going to look like 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the road. But when you're in a high growth environment that can be difficult to do, how do you approach building out your leadership bench and in that ambiguous environment?
So I'll repeat the question. It was in a high growth company. How do you approach, I think you said building out the leadership bench, is that correct? When sort of the future may be somewhat unknown, uncertain.
I think you should take it.
I would say that that's a really great question. And I would say that was the story of my life at Alteryx, probably a little bit still is. And so I feel like when you're growing so rapidly, ideally in a perfect world, we're doing this leadership assessment that I talked about. But I think in the moment and in the past, like maybe between year 2 and year 3 for me, we had to kind of find where was our greatest need. Who was crying out for help the most. And at Alteryx, we focused on our emerging leaders. And we said we kind of need to upskill this group of people that maybe are unofficial leaders leading projects or just leading themselves. And so we addressed kind of their needs and in that program. And part of that program we kind of emphasized to bring in other parts of the organization is we had a huge mentoring component. And so even though that was working with our ICs, the curious, the certain about leadership, we were also kind of upskilling our leaders by saying, hey, here's a coaching opportunity for you. Here's a way to be connected and to still kind of help someone else help yourself. Does that answer your question? Great. Does anyone else have to add to it?
I would just add one thing to this, which is go back to the company level, or at the very least the team level and the mission. When you are building out a bench, you're not going to know I need 6 deep experts in this particular vertical on this particular team. You can't tell the future. But if you can find people who are really motivated by your mission, who are really hungry to achieve the overall results you want, then usually those people are a safer bet, and then you can start to figure out where they land. This is like the good to great seats on the bus. If you want those people on your bus, you can find a seat for them, but get the people who are motivated by the big work that you do.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that is the way I see this is that you're trying to move from a reactive place, which a lot of startups are in, to a proactive place, right? And most of us find ourselves in the situation at some point where we go, oh, we promoted all these people into leadership positions and none of them know what they're doing. So we're trying to get ahead of that, and that's where the Emerging Leaders program came at Alteryx, because it was like, how do we did start with those leaders that were already in leadership positions that had no idea what they were doing, but it's still going at Alteryx because it's meant to be preparatory. It's meant to be like, oh, let's not throw them in and then teach them how to do it. Let's actually prepare them for the work that they will be doing. The catch with that is that it's really hard to learn something if you're not doing it, right? So we also try to think about what's the best timing for the leaders that are going through it. Are these people that are potentially about to be promoted into leadership? So they might get promoted into leadership while they're doing that program and able to implement it or implement what they're learning. The other piece of that is there a way to give people in that type of program some opportunity or way to use that information, whether it's mentoring another person on the team, being the person for new hires to guide them through their experience. There's ways that you can give them opportunities to really contextualize what otherwise would remain theoretical for them until they're in a leadership position.
Yeah, please. Yep, Hillary.
Do you have examples of companies you've worked with that have demonstrated a career path for excelling ICs who will not become people managers? Yes, is the short version. And I think to Jen's point, there is an inflection point where you have a lot of scrappy generalists. This is the path I described, scrappy generalist to deep expert. Nothing wrong with being either one of those, but it's interesting because you kind of hire the people you need right away, like the scrappy generalist, like, okay, well, we need someone to do something with marketing, we need some kind of developer, and then you go through this inflection point in the middle that's very, very messy, and then you get to the point where you have lots and lots of deep experts. Deep experts often reach, this is such an awful, morbid phrase, but like they reach a terminal level in their career as deep experts. So I'm thinking like data scientists, for example, who reach like a band 5 or a band 6. They don't want to be managers. They don't want to do anything different. They're just really, really good data scientists. I think the trick is when you have to figure out at what point those folks can be there at that terminal level and be fulfilled and be happy and have enough deep work that they can do. So it is still a question of how many people do you have, or at what point, and you may not have a full team of deep experts in that way. You might have one person or 2 people, and that can happen a little sooner in your organization. But I think Asana, for example, is a really great example of this. They're a massive global company now, and they have a lot of people who are super successful ICs, and they're really thriving in their careers, and they're really happy there.
So the question was, how important is it to formalize programs like an emerging leadership program? I think that was essentially.
Why they felt to be demotivated to formalize it?
Question for the team that
Yeah, I think honestly, it surprises me, but I think that is something that we got very lucky with. We have a massive interest in this program, and when we set it up, it was only for 4 cohorts. And we are about to start our 7th, and actually we have a waiting list, not only for this cohort, but that fills up the next. But I think if there is any kind of pushback or, hey, why are we doing this now? I mean, I think it goes back for kind of the basis of what we do as professionals and people is asking those questions. What are you scared of? You know, what is holding you back? Why aren't you buying? You know, I guess why aren't you buying in might be a little too aggressive, but you know, like why? And I also suggest pointing your finger and squinting your eyes. You're like, all my friends like the program. But I think just kind of getting down and saying, hey, what's the worst can happen? What are you afraid of? And I think if you kind of bring, if you don't have the data, finding data and saying this is what the data is going to bring and what we are hoping to get for this. And I also have tell every single cohort that this program is living and breathing. Nothing stays the same. No 2 cohorts back to back have ever been the same. We're always making changes, always asking the feedback. I always say, I want your feedback so it still is beneficial to you all, the participants. And I'm also very forward with our shortcomings. Like Jen shared about that program, is there's not an experiential learning part of it. We have a lot of social learning. There's online modules. You can discuss the concepts with mentors, but say, hey, you know, this is what the program has for you. This is what it's going to offer. But you're an emerging leaders program. Take on that initiative to go find that experiential learning so you can apply these before you're in that management role. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Who wants it?
Really quickly on that, we didn't have any criteria. You didn't have to pass a bar to get into it. It was for people that were currently leading. We did prioritize those people. So we built the cohorts to be diverse based on a number of different factors, including tenure, time and role, location, because Alteryx is a global company, department, gender, all the things. We wanted our cohorts to be diverse. But I don't know if there is now, but there was 0 criteria except that you weren't like on a performance plan. So anyone could do it. It was basically built for the curious. So that formality, there was no red tape with it.
What's your name, sorry? Kevin. Yeah, I'll talk to you afterwards. Got some thoughts.
I think there was a question or two.
So my question is whether you see Betsy. I don't know if you. I know what Alteryx does, and I thought this question, when I connect with the type of market we're in, the type of industry this company works, when I think about Alteryx, people are already thinking about innovation all the time on the dynamics of the market. I come from the mining industry, so sometimes for you to convince change, that's when I can relate to a little bit the answer that the company had. Sometimes getting those people to change is much harder than a company with like Alteryx. I don't know how insurance plays out, but I would compare even the two. See, like insurance is more resistant to change. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I think in mining, I see a lot of that. Hey, why are you doing this? It doesn't make sense to me, or does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you want to go ahead? You know, I think a huge part of my job is those relationships I build with our key partners. And the way I speak to my partners, shareholders, is just, it's kind of how they want to be spoken to. So when I come into contact with someone who is, you know, is not on the data, I have to kind of say, you know, this is the type of person that I'm going to have to communicate this way. And I'm going to have to pull this one individual story of this one person and the growth and the impact. You know, part of that evaluation that I have from our participants is not only just the data of were they promoted? Did we retain them? Are they still here? Did they like the program? But also kind of pulling out those anecdotes and those stories and saying this is how this person was impacted by it. And not only just for the participants, but again, the mentors and our small group facilitators. I try to gather all of that, the storytelling that goes behind it. So, you know, if possible, and if I know that person, I can speak to and bring kind of the information to them that they want to hear that I know will influence them. But it kind of goes hand in hand with, I mean, I hope that I know the person and I'm able to communicate they want the way to be influenced, but also just having those backup information as needed. Did you have something?
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think, again, I'm going to use the dreaded C word, culture, right? If in framing that conversation, right, and kind of what I was going to tell Kevin is that it's really not about the training program per se. If you zoom out, like, it's about what are you trying to do here, right? It's about the relationship between the company and the employee, right? And if you're smart, if you get that people is going to drive your success, you want to make sure that relationship is a win-win. Part of that win-win is that, yeah, the company's got to grow, but the person's also going to grow. So then I would ask, whoever maybe have questions or reservations about investing in a leadership program, whatever point, zoom out and ask and frame the conversation. Well, why does this matter to us? Why the program, right? And kind of tie it to values, like, are we a learning organization? That is not something you can copy paste or, oh, so-and-so did it. That's something you have to actively decide as a company. We are a learning organization, therefore this program, and see these stories, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the suggestion I would have.
So we go back in to there's never a wrong time to invest in your managers.
Awesome. Sure. We'll let Jen add and answer one more question.
So this, if people are data oriented, being in tech companies, I have found that the more science I can use, the more persuasive I can be. So at Cabbage, we did not have a natural kind of learning environment. Alteryx does. It was such a thrill to be there. I went there from Cabbage, and I was like, oh my gosh, everybody wants to learn all the things. But at Cabbage, I ended up using 3 data points to get managers on board with learning for themselves, which was our exit data said people are leaving because of management. Our engagement data said our managers were the least engaged, and our management factor in our engagement survey was low. So people were not having a good experience with their managers, and the managers themselves were not having a good experience. So I used that data, that feedback from the company, as a starting point to say, this is why this is needed. And then whenever I started to teach engineers, I went full science. Like, I started doing everything from the Neuro Leadership Institute. I treated them like adults. We want to know why. And I did a lot of the science behind the stuff. How many people say, like, oh, I've done leadership trainings and they were stupid and I didn't learn anything, right? I didn't want to create that type of experience for them, so I knew that their language was science, and I figured out how to speak to them in that language, which I think can be really impactful.
Thanks. We'll take one more question and then.
I was going to point out, people don't leave a company, they leave a bad manager. So, just mentioning that. Obviously, I'm curious how much you see the executive at the CEO level being part of your decision making in terms of removing bad management, and how much that means in terms of your success, in terms of trying to get the company business objectives and so forth met.
Why is everyone looking at me? Like, I have not spoken to John recently. But I mean, that does kind of pull on a thread, Jeff, around, what you as an organization decide is the type of leadership and the leadership values you want really starts at the top. Like, I've had to go through a tough realization in my own career around that you can have the best intentions as a leader yourself, but if it's not supported by the organization, by the culture, and there's a lot of data and research behind this, it really starts at the founders at the very top. There's this saying, well, people drive the culture. My words, if people drive the culture in an organization, your most top leaders is your rudder or your sail, right? So that, to your point, like, it starts with that example, not just what values they exhibit as leaders, how they act, and what behaviors they show is acceptable and not acceptable. It also kind of cascades down. How do they manage their management team, right? Everyone sees that. I mean, I'm sure everyone's heard the saying, you're always on stage as a manager or a leader. Like, it's no less true at that level. So it really, I think you've answered your own question there. It's so important.
Awesome. Well, thanks, everyone. We started to touch on this next question which focuses a little bit more around building an L&OD organization. So obviously, sort of ensuring that you're equipping leadership with the right resources to develop, it takes a commitment. So the question is, have you seen an organization do this without a dedicated learning and organizational development team? Two-part question. So have you seen an organization do this? And when is the best time to hire someone who's dedicated to this? And is leadership development a primary consideration when you do decide to make this hire?
Well, I can say I've seen it, but it's only a short-term strategy, and it doesn't usually go very well. You need people to be devoted to your people. And so, again, there is that kind of inflection point that we keep talking about. When do you build out a full, formal, a staff or a team? And that is really driven, again, by how many people you have and what are you building and what do you need to scale. But I'll say the thing that I wish I could nip in the bud is folks waiting way too long to do something like that. Like, you should not be waiting until your managers are crying out for learning, they are on the edge of burnt out, or they're past burnout and they're leaving your organization, and all of your exit data is showing we're having a bad time with our managers or we're really disengaged. I wish folks would engage someone in that coaching, training, enabling capacity much sooner. And whether that's an external person like me, whether that's hiring an internal person, whether that is leveraging your people ops person, if they have a little bit of time in their schedule, maybe 20% becomes devoted to L&OD, and you build from there. But I wish folks would do that a little sooner, as opposed to waiting until their staff is just crumbling because they have no support.
At Cabbage, I was employee 100 and I was L&D. So we brought it in really early. At Alteryx, we really didn't have L&D internally until about 1200. Everything was done through an external program, which was, I would say, just managed until Betsy came along, right? And then building in more internal things. At Pi, we brought that person in around 300. So to Hillary's points, there's a lot of different ways that you can do this and think about this. I will say at Pi, they have been working with an executive coach from the time that they were founded. So again, to Hillary's point, they did have we do have somebody external, and we still work with that person, mostly with our executive team, but she has done some other L&D stuff around communication, things like that within our organization before we brought in and brought that role internally. I will say it's like I'm biased, and I think it's a super important role, and if your leadership is willing to support it, I say bring it in as early as possible. John, our CEO, and Dax, our co-founder, they have always thought that people are important, which is why our boss, our SVP of People and Talent, was brought in to start consulting when there was like 3 people. And she was like, I don't have anything to do. Why do you want me here? But she was there, and she really helped to build the organization. So if you have that commitment to people from upper management, then either figuring out how do we bring in something externally if that's what we can afford and do right now and what makes sense, and then down the road bringing in someone internally.
Would anyone else like to add anything? Okay. Well, I actually have a question before I open up the group. So, I'm curious, do you feel like there could be repercussions to bringing in, not having that dedicated person, or going out and hiring someone with the experience in L&OD, and just saying, well, we need someone to do something? Have you seen that happen where there are repercussions? Or is it, let's just do something, which is better than nothing?
I think one of the important factors in we're going to do something and something is better than nothing is being really open and transparent that that's what you're doing. We are trying to do something for this team. We can't afford this, but here's what we can afford. Or we're not yet ready for this, but we're ready for this. And being really clear with your team that you're doing the very best you can, and you're giving them all you can at that, whatever your point is. I think the danger is when teams start to feel like, hey, we're really hungering for leadership development, or we're hungering for support for us as managers, and they gave us like a click and snooze self-serve training that I log into from a browser window. Like, that's not enough. So we know it's not enough. You just have to be clear, like, hey, we know this isn't enough. It's the starting place, but ultimately, here's what we're hoping to build. Ultimately, here's what we're hoping to provide. I have a client that has such a robust L&D offering that they have an internal coaching program. They partner with external coaches. Every individual contributor gets 6 sessions per half with an executive coach. So any IC just starting out, new grad program, anyone, they meet with an executive coach every single month. Managers get 9 sessions per half. That's like the highest end. I mean, thousands and thousands of dollars a month, enabling people at every single level in the organization. That is a massive global company. So you're probably not going to be able to do that when you start, but be really clear if that's what you're building toward, or you're building toward something really robust, that people understand that. Where you start is not where you land, but you have to let people know.
Great, thanks. So the question was, if you are small and you're starting something, would you suggest starting at the top, or starting more middle layer, middle management, or lower? Yeah, below. Okay.
I've seen it both ways. Highly recommend starting at the top. I actually, like, our leadership team, John and Dax, I truly feel like because they've had executive coaching since the time that we started, they model this for everything from, like, you need to go take vacation if you have unlimited vacation, and you need to model that for your people. Like, little things, well, that's not little in my opinion, but things like that, they model all of those things. The transparency, the openness, the honesty, the willingness to own mistakes in front of the entire company. That from executives is so impactful, and you can teach your team leads and your managers and do those programs, but then they're going to be going, well, I'm doing all this, but they're not. And then it starts to, that can get into a pretty negative situation. So I am a strong proponent for making sure that the leaders at the top are setting the example, and that you're providing that coaching for them. But all of it's important.
Well, as the external consultant on the panel, yes, we have value. I think that's honestly one of the benefits, and so I'm curious to hear from our internal folks, like, what your experience working with people like me has been. But one of the benefits, yes, we don't know the ins and outs, we don't know the interpersonal landmines, and so we just step all over the place. There are no sacred cows, and it's to the organization's benefit a lot of the time, because we don't know what we don't know, and so we're not afraid. We can hold that external, we have a different perspective. We can hold a bigger vision sometimes and remind people who get really stuck in the weeds, like, hey, I know this seems like a big deal, but actually this is the thing we're shooting for. So we hold bigger goals and bigger visions for folks than maybe they can even hold for themselves.
And to promote my external consultant colleague here, I think probably, we try to do something pretty complex here, especially if we talk about transformation of talent, and likely you're going to have a team. So I think, to Hillary's point, external perspective, extremely valuable. Most effective teams have a variety of perspectives. I do think it's important to have an internal champion that can also kind of flesh out some of the nuances. So it's probably going to be a bit of both, a bit of a balance there as well. But like, to the question's point, you do get stuck in some of the muck sometimes. So.
Another question in the back.
What about for people who are newer to L&D, or they want to get into L&D, especially like Betsy? What's your advice for maybe the courses to take, or growth paths and platforms to seek out, or even connections? Like, how does somebody really get deeper into L&D?
Question was advice for someone who's looking to get into the L&OD space, early career.
So I'm very thankful for everyone who did an informational interview with me, who coached me, who guided me. And I feel like that was a huge part of just asking, hey, how did you get there? What do I need to do? I did a lot of my own, just reading, especially blogs, so it kind of had a more personalized aspect to it, so I could learn that way. And I'm also very lucky that my career, even though it wasn't directly L&D specific, I had a lot of transferable skills. And I think a lot of it was, yes, the help of my mentors and coaches to really be confident that, yes, I can do this. I have done it, just maybe in a different aspect or in a different way. So if you have the opportunity within your organization to do a stretch assignment, reach out to kind of your L&D colleagues, ask them, hey, what experience do I need to get there? I know we refer to the bus analogy, getting the right people on the right bus in the right seat. And I have to admit, I had a role between leaving higher education into L&D at Alteryx, and I had a job where I was definitely the wrong person on the wrong bus, going to the wrong city, lost my luggage. It was probably horrible for everybody, but that's when I just was a sponge, and I got very, very vulnerable. Every day I said, I don't know what I don't know. What can I learn? And because of that role, I was then able to bring that more experience in that environment to Alteryx.
Thanks. Any other questions before we have about 3 minutes? So I'm gonna kind of consolidate the last question and hopefully give everyone some takeaways. And would love to, if we can hear from each of you, any specific courses, resources, skills that you would recommend. More so on the internal L&OD side as you're thinking about developing your leadership team at a company.
Sure, I'll start. I think there's a couple. Neuro Leadership Institute is one of my favorites. It used to be free, and now it's not, and I'm really sorry about that. But the research from David Rock is really compelling. He has 3 books. Highly recommend reading those books. And just really really understanding the psychology around behavior is really the root of what we're doing in learning and development, and particularly with leadership development. We're trying to create different behaviors, or really, what's the right word? I can't think of it, but make those behaviors that are already present that much bigger, and that much magnify the things that are already there. So anything that you can do that really is rooted in, I think, behavioral science, I think is really impactful, and I highly recommend David Rock and the NLI.
I agree that it's really nice to have kind of a concrete knowledge base behind that. So right now I'm getting my organizational development certificate from Penn State. So it's kind of allowing me to have that formal education, knowledge, theory base that I can apply to my work, but also just a great mentor, thought partner, whether it's a coworker, a peer. We have an unofficial book club, I guess it's official book club, of reading just kind of books that might expand your knowledge and then being able to apply it at work.
I love that. Thank you. In my world, the book that has been the most transformational for me is called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. She talks so much about building transformational experiences that take people on a journey, and she has facilitated at companies, she facilitates at the UN. And so as a facilitator and a coach and a designer of gatherings that are meant to transform people, that impacts everything I do, whether it's music or learning objectives or the primary shift statement that we use that helps us know what journey we are going to lead people on, whether it's a 2-hour feedback training or a 3-day leadership retreat.
I would also plug formal education, definitely understanding the science of behavior, all that. And from that, I've learned you're going to have to start for yourself, how you show up in your work every day. And this really, I think, applies to leadership. Really, any position is that there's this saying, all of us have baggage. The question is just whether it's check in or carry on, right? So again, that kind of answer to many questions. Make sure you have if not a therapist, a good friend who listens well, a good bottle of wine. Since we're throwing out advice, Chardonnay, Washington State region, brilliant. So yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
And a coach. Get a coach to listen to you vent and help you get out of your own mess.
Awesome. Well, let's give everyone a round of applause.